I'm speaking with Andrew Constantino, who is 30 years old. He is a Seattle resident.
I'm 50.
What? Oh, for 30 years. Sorry. You're 50?
I'm 50.
You look pretty good for 50.
You look pretty good.
Thanks, but I wasn't shooting heroin for 12 years.
Oh, it's a funny thing that William S. Burroughs, the beat poet,
Love him.
often talked about
Naked
how
lunch.
Morphine, heroin, it's almost like you can live forever. It doesn't consume your body like a lot of the modern synthetics.
You're not promoting somebody being...
don't do it.
Right. Do longevity medical clinic.
Yeah, Botox is better.
Yes. You have an editorial in the Times today. And Seattle harm reduction approach around drugs, it perpetrates the harm. And it's you just take people through your life, through the choices that you made, the helplessness of it. You referred to what drugs do is they hold your mind captive. What does that mean?
Yeah, I first have to say that, like, that title is a little spicy for my taste. There is a place for harm reduction philosophy. I think that it's just a little too prominent right now. I think that abstinence and sobriety is the gold standard. But being held captive, one way I like to describe it with a fancy word that I like called an oubliette, which is like a French prison where you're basically thrown in a very deep cell and forgotten about. And that's what it feels like being addicted to opiates. That you fall into this pit inside of your own mind. Just your emotions and your mind and your body are held captive there, and it feels inescapable.
There is another French prison where Camus talks about it, where it is too small that you can't sit down, and you can't stand up, so you have to squat the whole time.
That sounds horrible.
And then they let you out to walk 1 hour, and then they put you back in for another 23 hours. And the people that have been in that prison, in that cell, what they learn is it is more painful to straighten back up again and walk erect for 1 hour in the yard before going back in again. So they would rather stay. So when they open the cell, Andrew, and they walk out, they stay in a squatting position and walk around because the pain itself of having to straighten up and then go back down again is too much for them. So for you, to draw that analogy, for you to come up and come out of the pain, or at least the pain reducing aspect of drugs, would mean that you would then have to experience the pain of reality.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people that don't understand maybe what's happening with a loved one or other strangers that are captured by addiction is you think if you just stop today, then life would improve. But often you're not at zero. It's like you end up in this pit where you've destroyed your relationships, you've destroyed your reputation or your finances, and you probably have like some medical issues that you have to address or dental issues that you have to address. And so when you actually stop and you no longer have the drug to help you cope, man, you start at like -10, and it's really hard to dig yourself back to zero.
Sarah Nelson, she's been in here. I'm a fan of hers. She has a very simple plan, which is let's not spend a lot of money on handing out needles and syringes and crack pipes or something else. Why don't we actually, and rather than meeting people where they are, why don't we step in as adults and provide actual medical care for individuals that are medically sickened by these drugs?
Yeah, I love Sarah. I've had the pleasure of meeting her this year, and definitely like being a green-haired counterculture type of person, I thought she was the villain for her first few years in office. But meeting her and just like hearing her thoughtfulness and like her heart for it, her own struggle with addiction. I just feel like recovery needs to be our North Star. It's getting people to a healthy place where they're in control over their lives. They're making decisions for themselves. And I think what happens is that when someone gets to that state, they're not all going to agree with me or be like me, but they become your ally in the work, right? These will become people that want to help others. and that they can also not only help others, they can help themselves. So it costs less and it becomes easier because you're rescuing people, and they will be thankful once you do.
Sometimes they say the best way to understand in an argument and possibly win, if there's a winner or loser in the argument, is to be able to articulate the other person's point, say it to them, and then see if they agree. So it would seem the other side of this argument, which is, no, we're going to meet people where we are. We are going to provide, we're going to just give them the tools that they need. We'll allow them to make the decision that they need help. And when they do need the help, we'll be there for them. But in the meantime, hey, here's, a clean needle. Here's a crack pipe. Here's this, here's that. And they even came up with this idea, I don't know where it is at this point, that they're going to hand out the drugs. The state of Washington would provide the drugs for the people. So can you articulate that position? Where do those people come from, and why do they have this idea that this is the best way to help somebody?
It's like I've thought about it a lot, and I think that, my feelings on it have changed over time, and I think that's natural, but it's kind of like homelessness itself is a misnomer. It is not one group of people. It's like if we were going to try to find categories, it's more like 4 or 5 different groups of people. And so there is a group of people that are gravely disabled, have like severe mental health issues or physical health issues. Maybe they're elderly, and they need, ongoing, possibly lifelong treatment with like a drug like methadone. And maybe they're going to use some illicit drugs, but, you're going to try to help them maintain on a different path. But when we start to conflate that group with the group of like 20-somethings, 30-somethings, where, they've only been addicted or using for maybe a year, maybe 3 years, this is not a lifelong disability that they're experiencing. But if they do continue to use, they could damage their bodies or their minds in ways where they could become like the permanent patient. So in my mind, it's kind of like a lot of that compassionate, good-natured philosophy. It fails to acknowledge that there are different demographics, and it's not a monolith.
So we're speaking with Andrew Constantino, who 30 years, a Seattle resident, now 50, looking good by the way, and addicted to heroin, 2 years of addicted to meth as well, several years of living in the streets of Seattle. Katie Wilson, who's running for mayor, sat right in the chair you're sitting in, and we were talking about homelessness, and it seemed like her sort of line of thinking when on homeless was the cost of housing is way too high. The landlord comes in and raises the rent 30%, and the person then finds themselves on the street, and now they're living there in a tent, and then that's the problem.
Yeah, I have to say, I know Katie. Her and I, like in like political organizing, we've worked together in the past, maybe like 10 years ago. I love her. I think she's a intelligent, thoughtful person who's authentic. I would disagree with her take on it. Definitely 20 years ago when I was a heroin user, there were some cheaper housing options in Seattle, kind of like SROs, week-to-week places where come up with $90 and you can stay for a week. You don't need an ID to rent it. That's evaporated. And so I think for a lot of like heroin users or maybe cocaine users that were able to maintain a job in their lives, that was useful. In general, a fentanyl user can't even do that, right? They don't spend enough time conscious to be able to maintain their life. And I'm not speaking on behalf of all fentanyl users, but in general. And with the new synthetic methamphetamine, it's very difficult to kind of have any semblance of a controlled addiction. But I think that...
But do you think that's the line? Does it go from, the rent went up and next thing I know I'm homeless? No, I don't think so either. I don't think the person goes from having a job, being a functioning member of society, and then the rent goes up 30%, and the next thing you know, they're strung out on the streets of Seattle.
No, your addiction starts before that. Often your life is stable and you have some positive relationships, and then the addiction infiltrates and it takes over your life and it destroys everything. That's how it works. And whether the rent goes up or down, it doesn't matter. If someone was on a yacht with caviar, champagne, and supermodels, and they're smoking meth, eventually they're going to think the supermodels are trying to kill them, and the FBI is going to blow up the yacht. That's what the drug does.
So what is the line? it's the drugs, then the relationship gets broken, then the family kicks you out, and then you're on a friend's couch, and then you're stealing from the friend in order to keep the drugs going, and then the friend says, I'm sick of it, I'm done with this. You try to surf onto another couch, there's nowhere else for you to go, and then you can just more easily just be on the street because that way you're closer to where you can buy the drugs, and then you're stealing in order to support the habit. Is that generally the life?
To me, you just described the path of addiction. Yes, for most people, that's what we're looking at.
So it begins first with some outside source, a drug, and then it's the broken relationships.
Yeah, it's like one term I've never heard used to describe how addiction works is, people call it like a disease, but it's kind of like a social contagion. It jumps from one person to another. So, you meet like a cute boy and you start hanging out with them, and they are secretly an occasional meth user. They get you to try it. And, that's how it jumps from one person to another. So that's one of the reasons why I feel like, it's not about punishing people. It's not about hurting them, but just allowing addiction, making it a norm, being more accepting of it, and not being more serious about stopping, like this widespread addiction. We're just allowing it to fester and to potentially jump to more people.
So what's the solution?
Well,
I ask you because you've walked this, you've seen this, you've had friends that have died, you know what it's like out there, and while you were there, and in some moment of sobriety, it would come to you, I need X.
Yeah, I mean, I can say this: I've had friends that have died this year from a relapse, and they were heroin users. They don't know about fentanyl. Relapse, just gone. So this isn't, some many years ago, like I lost a friend or two. The relationship that I had, the girl that I was dating and my addiction was out of control, she's gone. I stopped. She didn't. That's the difference. Like our relationship ended because I wanted to walk away from the drugs, not her. And so I really feel like everyone that we see that is still using out there, they're all going to die. There's no timeline where they're going to survive unless we do something. And so, this can sound authoritarian or somehow right-wing, but it's like one of the few powers afforded us is you could arrest someone for possession, for selling, and use that as an impetus to get treatment. It doesn't mean we want you to rot in an oubliette. You're already in one. But it can allow us to have a little bit of leverage, and I think that it doesn't mean that you have to go and arrest 10,000 people. It's just there has to at least be some enforcement of law. I see dealers on the street every day and, with impunity, they're out there selling the most dangerous drugs in the world. And it's really upsetting. And so I just think that there has to be a little more law enforcement coupled with what we've learned. We don't have a desire to be like the 80s, like mass incarceration, police with tanks busting down crack houses. That's not what we're trying to do, but we need a little more leverage in order to help people get into the treatment they need. And I honestly believe that if you're doing treatment where, hey, let's watch some Netflix, let's have some cupcakes, stay away from the drugs, maybe you need some medicine, get some counseling, that person is going to thank you for actually caring about them, actually caring enough to intervene instead of leaving them to die in an alley.
To the people, I'm not going to ask you, but you're going to, I'm going to ask the question. You're going to, unfortunately, you probably might feel like you're up against the wall because, again, you mentioned that Katie's your friend. So I'll say something, and she's also running. She looks like she might win against Bruce Harrell. I said, where do these people come from? And she said, well, they're local or King County. And I said, and I didn't want to get into a battle of statistics and data, but I believe from stories I've heard and from people I've interviewed that Seattle is a good place to do drugs. And Seattle's a good place to be homeless because the cops aren't going to bother you. There's plenty of drugs. It's not that expensive. And you want to come in from Idaho, you want to come in from, say, some other state, you can come here and you get food, you're going to get shelter, they're going to have services for you. How many people that you met in your 12 years of being homeless were actually from other states?
Oh, I mean, it's a pretty big mix in my mind. It's like anyone that I meet or I know in my work or my time on the street as an addict. To me, someone is just as likely to be from Florida or Texas as they are from Gig Harbor or Port Townsend. So I think that it isn't just like a lax attitude towards drug use or public drug use. The West Coast calls to all kinds of green-haired people like me, or I think that, it's a cultural thing. And I think that's one of the charms of the West Coast, the live and let live kind of attitude. I just think that when that live and let live attitude comes up against fentanyl, it doesn't work anymore. It starts to break.
Right, because then it becomes a live and let die.
Yeah, there you go.
See that? See, I always punch
Beautiful.
out there. See that? Nicely done. Can you hang out? Because I want to talk to you because you, how many years were you official member of Antifa?
Oh, Lord. Well, like they would say, there's no like group meetings or union dues. It's more like crowds that you're hanging out with.
Are you allowed to talk about this without getting in trouble in Capitol Hill?
Yeah, I live in Capitol Hill, so don't get me hurt. They might yell at me.
Can you talk about it?
Well, I mean, I think that
here's the question: do I hold you over for another segment, or you
sure?
go home?
I'm happy to talk.
All right,
about
I want to find out more about it. Joe, you okay with that?
Okay with me?
All right. By the way, I'm really enjoying my time with you. You're really fun, and that green hair is not natural, is it?
Yeah, I was born this way, baby.
Thank you. How did you come out of hell? Because you didn't explain that. I guess they didn't have enough time, enough space for you to explain that. And they said, how did he get out of that?
Yeah, so I think that often recovery is just not a straight line. It's not like we just step 1, 2, 3, now you're good. So really it was getting arrested. I felt like once I started getting arrested, a lot of the police knew me, maybe because, I have colorful hair or whatever, but I couldn't stay out of jail. Like I was spending every weekend in jail, whether that's because of petty theft or just like possession, buying drugs, whatever. So they always had me on possession. Often the police wouldn't even put charges on me, so I would just spend 2 days in jail, then they just released me. And it was enough of a drag that, like being dope sick in jail really sucks. And so it gave me some sober time. Even if I was sick, it gave me a little bit of time to kind of contemplate the choices I was making, what was happening in my life. Because when you're high, you're just checked out. You're in the opiate dream world. And so then that made it so I would occasionally put myself into like a detox, like Valley Cities, and there's really cool staff there, and they will try to have the breakthrough with you. But then, I'd go back and forth. And this is a while ago, so there weren't as many medical or medication options. Like there are so many good ones now that can help you. And so it was a medication called Suboxone. And it's a funny story that I went and I had an appointment. My girlfriend at the time, she had insurance. I didn't. And the doctor said, don't rat me out and I'll write you a double prescription. So he wrote her a double prescription because I didn't have insurance. And then I started taking the medication. And Suboxone is very effective with heroin. Within 7 days, I had a job again. I felt good. I felt stable. And so I took Suboxone, and I would occasionally abuse it, right? I would stop taking my medicine. I'd get paid. I'd get high for 2 days, and then I'd get back on the medicine. I did that for like a year, but I felt like that was part of the process. That was like part of me learning new patterns, new norms, separating myself from the drug. And, eventually the doctor was like, okay, you've had Suboxone long enough. Let's talk about getting off it. And I was scared to do that. I was scared to kick it. But, you're dealing with a doctor. They know what they're doing, and so it worked. And I did have one more relapse after the death of my mother, after I had stopped Suboxone, and it almost killed me. But luckily, since I had repaired a lot of my life, I had relationships. I had friends that intervened at that time and just didn't let me spiral again. And I'm telling you, it's like once I came out of no medication, no more opiates, I felt like I didn't know what my favorite color was. I didn't know what food I liked. That for so long I was trapped in that dream of what opiates do to you. They capture your mind. That it took me time to kind of rediscover who I was.
In the time remaining, Antifa A proud member of a non-organized group. We've been told by politicians it's not a group, it's just a thought. I don't know if you're still with them or not, but can you, in 2 minutes, explain the mindset of people that go out into the streets, break windows, and light things on fire?
Well, I think that, everyone is pretty aware that somehow we crossed into the mirror universe. I don't quite know when that happened, but it was a few years ago. Antifa, I consider myself an anarchist, post-left anarchist. But
it's hard to be an anarchist in Seattle, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Why? Why is it hard to be an anarchist in Seattle?
It's because modern anarchists, modern Antifa gives it a bad name. The original idea is that if Nazis or like actual right-wing extremists want to organize, someone needs to be there to challenge them, to make them intimidated instead of allowing them to intimidate others. Now, Antifa is the thing that it's supposed to stand against. They're the authoritarians who try to intimidate people. And so...
And since there are really no one obeys and no one enforces laws, you really have nothing to push against.
Well, I definitely think that the left is always at its best, when it gets to be the critic, So, yeah. But and the right is always at its best when it has the burden of responsibility.
And so then they're the ones building, and the other ones are the ones destroying. It's the back and forth.
Oh yeah, it's dynamic, right? Yeah.
Right. If they didn't repair the windows, there'd be nothing for those guys to smash.
Listen, there has to be new opportunities for window makers, okay?
Oh.
And Antifa provides that opportunity.
The Glaziers love them.
There are black mask makers in this world that would go bankrupt.